What actions did your mother take that destroyed your relationship with her? I was 12 when the world inside our apartment tilted. It wasn't a slammed door or a fight, it was a gallery app. Dad was away on a work trip. Mom told us, if anyone calls, I'm sleeping, with a little smile that meant play along. My brother and I were propped in front of cartoons, the kind of lazy afternoon where time melts. I went to look for a charger and found her phone on the table, screen lit, one swipe to unlock. She never used a code back then. And there it was, a photo of two boarding passes, side by side like they were holding hands. Her name, a man's name, a date that didn't match any girl's lunch I'd heard about. I didn't go looking for proof. Proof found me. The next picture was them together. Not scandalous, just intimate in the way bodies are when they've forgotten to pretend. Her face held this soft, unfamiliar light. I felt it like a drop, then more. Hotel carpets, a mirror selfie with his shoulder in the frame, a napkin with his initials. It wasn't a one-off, it was a pattern, an exit she'd polished. I deleted the photos because 12-year-old me thought that could undo them. If the images weren't there, maybe the reality would vanish. I remember my fingers shaking on the delete button, like the phone might bite me. The gallery closed. The apartment did not. After that, the calls started to make sense. Late-night laughter from the kitchen. The way Mom said, just a friend, and angled the phone away. I told myself stories to keep breathing. Maybe he was a cousin, maybe a client, maybe anything else. But she didn't hide well. Not from us. It wasn't secrecy. It was theater, and we were the audience she wanted to train. When I finally broke, it wasn't brave. It was messy. She was at the sink, talking to him with that syrupy voice adults use when they want to be someone else. My brother was in the next room with his headphones on, but he kept looking up like a cat that knows a storm is close. The conversation drifted into words that made my skin crawl. Intimate things, whispered like a dare. I stood there and started crying. Not because I wanted to, but because my body revolted. I know, I said. I saw the pictures. The words came out in gasps. Please don't do this around us. Please don't make us lie. She turned off the water. The silence between us expanded, cracked, and then she said the thing that split me from her in one line. You're making things up. I wasn't. I said so. I said I saw. She said you're wrong. I said please stop. She said okay, in the tone people use when they want you to stop talking. And for 1 week, she didn't take his calls in front of us. I counted days like a hostage. On the 8th day, the phone was on speaker. Say hi, she told us, bright as a commercial. He sent chocolates. We hadn't asked for anything. We didn't want to speak to a man who lived in our house through her voice. We stared at the box on the table like it had teeth. That became the shape of our life. My mother's relationship pressed against our faces until it left a print. She told us to keep secrets from Dad when he called from hotel rooms. We learned how to say she's asleep with a straight voice. When Dad came home, the house was normal like a set after filming. She was careful for a while, then careless again. The rhythm of it taught me nausea. The first time he messaged me, it was for my graduation. Congrats, from a number I didn't recognize. I blocked it. Then another number. Block another. Block. I told Mom to make him stop. She said, he just wants to be nice. He was not nice. He was a trespasser in a place he had no right to enter. My phone, my milestones, my privacy. I changed my settings, my photo, my habits. He found a way to appear anyway, like mold in a damp corner. At school, I learned how to live with a secret that didn't belong to me but stuck to me. I stopped inviting people over. If a teacher asked a question about parents, my mouth dried. I watched couples in the street, played the mean game of guessing who was better at pretending. I hated that the game lived in me. The worst was the repetition. She narrated our lives to him. If I walked by and said, I'm going to the library, she'd repeat it into the phone. If I got a grade, he knew it. If I laughed, if I cried, if I argued about curfew, he knew. My mother used my days as conversation pieces for a man who wasn't part of our family, like my life was a radio show they co-hosted. I told her 100 times, stop, respect my privacy. She said, okay, the way she did the first week. It never lasted. There were fights, of course. One night, I heard Dad's voice break open in the living room, a sound I'd never heard from him. The rug muffled everything but the shape of it. Betrayal has a pitch. I held my brother's door shut with my hand because he wanted to come out, and I didn't want him to see our parents as strangers. In the morning, the kitchen was clean and Mom made tea like nothing. Dad said, talk to her properly, as if tone could fix physics. When I was 19, I found out he had a key. Not my father, him, the man. A second key to our home, slipped into his life like a punchline. I stood at the threshold in the afternoon, my bag still on my shoulder, and saw his shoes by the door. My heart did something ugly. The apartment was empty, but it wasn't. Suddenly, my bedroom didn't feel like a room. It felt like a place anyone could enter with the right permission from the wrong person. I started locking my door when I showered. I put my journals in a box with a code. I hated that I had to turn my home into a bunker to feel like I existed inside it. People think you stop loving when you start hating. You don't. Love stays like a bruise under the skin. You can press it and make yourself dizzy. You can cover it and pretend it's gone. But it's there. I love my mother. I hate what she turned our life into. I hate that she used us as cover for her story. I hate that she handed a stranger a map of us and said, here, live inside my children's days. I don't tell anyone all of this because the place we live in eats scandal for breakfast and then spits it back at you. If I went to an aunt, she'd say, that's adult business. If I told a friend, their mother would tell 10 others. If I spoke to someone official, it would come back to our door with a louder echo. We're conservative in public and reckless in private. That combination builds cages. Dad still tells me to be respectful when I talk to her. I've tried. I have tried so hard I've given myself headaches. But respect isn't a blanket you throw over a fire. Respect without safety is just performance. Every time I sit across from her, I feel the old 12-year-old me standing behind my shoulder, shaking, begging, please don't make me lie again. This is the part people don't see when they hear affair. The fallout doesn't just land on a marriage, it lands on a child's sense of inside/outside. It rearranges doors in your head. You can't unknow the fact that the person who braided your hair also handed a key to a stranger and told you to smile about it. I keep telling myself I'll move out, save enough, pack boxes, find a place where my door only opens to people I choose. But then I think of my younger sibling, the way they still flinch when mom says, say hi, and the phone lights up on speaker. How can I leave them to be the only audience left? How can I stay and not turn into a ghost of myself? So I keep a small bag under the bed with the things that matter. Documents, some cash, a hard drive. I keep passwords no one else knows. I keep my brother's spare key on my lanyard. These are the rituals of a person who loves and hates the same person and is trying to survive the overlap. People tell you family is forever. They forget to mention how long forever can feel when the person who gave you your name refuses to say yours without an echo on the other end of the line. After that week of pretend silence, the sound of her affair became the soundtrack of our house. It wasn't constant shouting or drama. It was a low, ordinary hum that got into everything, a ringtone that made my stomach drop, a laugh from the kitchen that didn't belong to our family, the soft, private tone she saved for him and used while we were doing homework at the table. You can live with anything if it's loud enough to name. What kills you is the quiet kind that asks you to act normal. School turned into the safe place I never really felt safe in. I learned how to avoid the questions that had traps in them. I gave vague answers about weekends, invented errands, kept friends at a distance that felt polite but firm. It wasn't just shame, it was logistics. If people came over, I'd have to watch their faces when the phone lit up on speaker, or when she drifted into the hallway with that careful step, or when a stranger's name popped up like a watermark over our dinner. I didn't want witnesses. I didn't want anyone to see me swallow whatever that made me feel. I started doing small things that looked like personality but were really survival. Headphones on in the living room so I could pretend I wasn't hearing. Dishes done at odd hours so I could control when I had to be in the kitchen. Long showers, not for comfort, but because steam is thicker than the air that carries certain sounds. I kept my brother close without making it a project. We developed a wordless routine. If the phone went on speaker, one of us turned up the TV. If a certain ringtone played, one of us found a reason to leave the room. We weren't brave. We were tired. She tried to fold him into our lives like it could be normal if we stopped resisting. The first time she made us thank him for chocolates, I stared at the foil wrappers until they stopped being shapes. I said the words because I was still young enough to think politeness could keep the world from getting worse. Later, when I refused, it came out as disgust, and she called it rudeness. Maybe it was. I don't know what to call a kid saying no to the wrong thing. He learned my number without my permission. Messages arrived like flies. Congratulations I hadn't asked for. Comments that used my name too easily. I blocked him and he reappeared, as if numbers are doors that can't be locked if someone is determined to try them all. I changed my settings, shut things down, built little walls on a device that had belonged to me. He kept finding ways around them, and every new message told me the same thing. The boundary wasn't mine to set as long as my mother kept handing him maps. There were flashes of ordinary life that made it worse. Birthdays, where she remembered the cake I liked but still put her phone face up on the table. Family gatherings where she smiled like any other aunt, then vanished to type in a corner with the kind of focus people reserve for sacred things. I watched cousins complain about strict parents and wanted to trade problems with them for a day, to see what it felt like to be mad at rules instead of being forced to live without any that protected you. My father's version of this was a quiet man trying not to break in front of his children. He was never perfect, never heroic, just present. He asked us about school, fixed the squeak in my brother's door, packed a bag for a work trip, and left notes under the salt shaker. Once in a while, I'd hear the fight crack open at night, and I would hold my breath until it closed again. In the morning, he made tea, like hands can apologize for things they didn't do. When he told me to be respectful with her, I heard the plea under it. Don't make me lose both of you. There were lies that didn't even try to be clever. She'd tell an aunt she was with a friend, then text him in the car while we waited outside a shop. I began to recognize the posture that meant a lie was being prepared. The too bright tone, the half smile that didn't reach her eyes, the way she moved a conversation around like furniture. I learned things I didn't want to know about adults. I learned that it's possible to be both careful and careless at the same time. When I found out about the key, it wasn't a dramatic scene. The realization came in pieces. A chessboard moved a square when no one else had been home. A mug out of place that didn't smell like our coffee. The easy way she said, "Don't worry about it," when I asked how someone had dropped something off. Then one afternoon his shoes were by the door, plain as facts. I stood there with my bag still on my shoulder and felt the apartment tilt again. I didn't say anything to her. I went to my room and hid every small private thing that felt like mine. You can love a parent and still feel invaded by the life they built without asking you. I think about my brother whenever I plan escape. I have a version of my future where I live 3 metro stops away, and the door to my place only opens to people I choose. Then I see his face when she chirps at him to say hi, the way he rolls his eyes and does it anyway, the way he refuses and braces for the argument, the way he pretends not to hear. I don't want him to be in that house alone with the hum. I don't want to be the guilty older sibling with a tidy place and a clean conscience. So I hover between leaving and staying, between packing and pausing. I save money and stash it like a secret, then spend it on groceries because the fridge is empty and Dad is late and someone has to feed us. I keep a backpack ready for the day I decide. I keep my brother's spare key in my pocket. My mother calls it dramatic when she notices the bag, and I say nothing because I can't explain to her what it is to live in a house where the door feels like it swings for a stranger first. People like to ask if I confronted her properly, as if there's a correct form I forgot to fill out. I tried more than once. It always slides off the same way. She looks wounded, not guilty. She says I'm being unkind, that I'm choosing to hate her, that I'm exaggerating. She talks about love like it's a discount coupon, something you can show at the counter to excuse the cost. I don't have the language that makes her hear me. Maybe there isn't one. The closest I come to peace is ordinary time, doing dishes to the sound of my own playlist, studying with my brother at the same table without looking up, laughing at something stupid on TV, and forgetting for 10 minutes where we are. The hum returns, but for those 10 minutes, I can breathe without counting. I hold on to those moments like receipts that prove the day was real. Every so often, I remember the first photo I deleted and the child who thought that would fix it. I don't hate that kid. I understand them. I understand the impulse to make evidence vanish, so reality will follow. Now, older, I know it doesn't work that way. Reality doesn't care about your trash folder. It cares about doors, about keys, about the people who decide what normal is for a family, and how loudly they insist on it. I am still in the house. I still love a person I sometimes can't stand to look at. I still plan, still pause, still wake up and make breakfast. Like these days are steps toward a place where I can sit at a table and not share my life with someone who got it through a phone. The noise is still here. So am I. That feels like something, even if I can't name it yet. By the time I was 16, the house felt like a station where trains came and went on someone else's timetable. I learned to live on the platform. I came home late enough to miss the peak hours of whatever performance was happening, left early enough to be gone before the day warmed up. It looked like independence from the outside. Inside, it was avoidance dressed as maturity. I kept my room clean the way people keep a suitcase ready. Clothes folded in stacks that could slide into a bag, chargers coiled and tucked where I could grab them without thinking, documents in a sleeve that never left the top drawer. I bought a small safe with a cheap lock and put my journals in it, not because they were scandalous, but because they were mine. A friend once asked why I was so organized. I didn't explain that organization for me meant inventing a kind of privacy. The edges of me got sharp. I didn't mean for that to happen. It was a side effect of constant bracing. When you live waiting for a ringtone to trigger a mood, your body stays half flexed. I smiled less. I laughed at jokes a beat too late. Teachers called it focus. I called it a permanent flinch. There were episodes that glued themselves to that year. One weekend, my mother insisted we drive to a cousin's birthday outside the city. It was the kind of event where adults talk in circles and kids form clumps in corners. Halfway through, she disappeared to help in the kitchen, and I knew what that meant because her shoulders loosened in that specific way. I found her near the pantry, phone in her hand, face lit by a voice that wasn't in the room. She didn't see me at first. When she did, she made a face like I had intruded on a prayer. Later in the car, she talked all the way home about family obligations and how exhausting they were. It was somehow my fault we'd stayed longer than she wanted. That's how the logic worked when she needed it to. Another time, he sent flowers to the house on my exam day. The card had my name on it and a message that used a nickname only my parents and grandparents are allowed to say. The delivery guy said it cheerfully in the hallway. I stood there with the bouquet in my hands like it was evidence. My mother called it thoughtful. I put the flowers in the trash behind the building and washed my hands twice. For weeks after that, I felt the nickname hanging in the air, like this man had reached in and grabbed a cord connected to my childhood and tugged on it because he could. I tried boundaries that year, not the pretty kind you put on motivational posters, but the boring kind that start with no and end with a closed door. No speakerphone in common spaces. No details about my day told to him as if it were public content. No gifts I hadn't asked for or touched first. Sometimes she nodded as if she agreed. Sometimes she rolled her eyes like I had adopted a trend. The thing about boundaries is they work only if the other person sees the wall as real. Mine often felt like chalk lines in the rain. He tested his own edges with me. Messages came from numbers I didn't recognize. Short notes that pretended intimacy. Smiling emojis I imagined he assumed would soften everything. When I blocked one, another arrived a few weeks later. Once he found me on a messaging app through a mutual contact and sent a photo of a dessert he said he'd brought for the kids. I stared at the picture and felt rage and nausea share a seat in my chest. The audacity in calling us the kids, the way he wrote it like a membership he'd paid for. I didn't answer. I deleted the app for a while and told my mother again to stop. She said he just wanted to be part of our lives. I said he wasn't. The conversation dissolved like sugar in tea and left the same cloying aftertaste. School was supposed to be the neutral ground, but I brought the edges with me there too. I joined study groups that met in libraries where phones stayed on silent. I avoided sleepovers because doors there closed without codes, and mothers asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. I kept good grades like they were a shield. I watched couples my age try on drama and thought, you have no idea. Sometimes I envied them for the simplicity of their chaos. Sometimes I resented them for treating love like a game when my house was proof that the score could ruin a whole team. I found small places where I could breathe in full conversations. A coffee shop near the bus stop that played music loud enough to replace the noise in my head. A park bench after dark where the trees blurred the streetlights, and I could pretend for 10 minutes the apartment behind me belonged to a stranger. A teacher who let me sit in the empty classroom at lunch and didn't ask why. When I thanked him at the end of term, he said it was no trouble. He didn't know what he'd given me. He didn't need to. As graduation got closer, the family performed normal with extra enthusiasm. Plans were discussed, photos hinted at, relatives counted on a list. I was measured for clothes I didn't want and told to smile. My mother started telling him everything as if narrating our progress to a manager. I heard my name in sentences I hadn't given permission for. I heard my future being shared like a weather report. I told her to stop again. She pretended not to hear in that practiced way. Dad stayed on the edges, tired eyes, careful hands, the shape of a man keeping a house upright with his shoulders. The day before the ceremony, he texted me from a new number. It was a simple message of congratulations, almost polite. I blocked it, and then spent half an hour angry that I had to spend half an hour on a thing that should never have reached me. I went for a run and ran longer than I could hold, stopped under a bridge, and felt my lungs burn until the burn wiped the anger clean. For a moment, the only truth I knew was breath in, breath out. I held on to that because there was nothing else that simple left. Graduation itself passed like a play I acted in without enjoying. I shook hands, took the certificate, looked for my brother in the crowd because his face was the only anchor I trusted. Cameras flashed and I kept my smile, not because I was happy, but because I needed at least one set of photos that belonged to me. At home, gifts appeared from relatives and one from him through my mother's hands, wrapped in neat paper. I didn't open it. I left it on the table and it disappeared overnight, which was a kindness I didn't ask for and didn't thank her for. After the ceremony, a classmate asked what I was doing next. I said I wasn't sure yet, which was both true and a way to keep the conversation small. In my head, I was doing math. How much money a cheap room costs, how far a commute would be, whether leaving would feel like escape or abandonment, whether staying would feel like loyalty or surrender. None of the words fit right. They still don't. What I did have were edges that finally started to feel like a shape instead of just a fence. I could say no and leave the room without explaining. I could sit at the table and not answer questions that weren't asked in good faith. I could look my mother in the eye and let her see how angry I was without turning it into a scene. It didn't fix us. It drew a line where I ended and she began, which is something I had not had for years. On nights when the house was quiet and she had fallen asleep with the phone still on the pillow beside her, I would stand in the hallway and listen to the small sounds of the building, the elevator cables, a neighbor's kettle clicking off, footsteps on the stairs. I imagined other people's kitchens with their own dramas, their own little routines, their own versions of love stretched thin and stitched back together. It didn't make me feel better exactly. It made me feel less singled out by the universe. Ordinary tragedy is still tragedy, but it's also survivable. I wish I could say that by the time I turned 18, I knew what to do. I didn't. I only knew what not to do. I would not be the messenger between her two lives. I would not make her choices look easier by cushioning them. I would not carry secrets that did not belong to me. I would not pretend the key in a stranger's pocket was anything other than a betrayal dressed up as adult freedom. That was the year I stopped waiting for her to choose us. I started choosing me in small, unremarkable ways. It felt selfish in the beginning. It felt necessary by the end. And once I felt necessary again, the house became something I lived in, not something that lived me. It still hummed, but I could hear my own thoughts over it sometimes, which was more relief than I'd let myself hope for. After graduation, I didn't sprint out of the house. I drifted toward the door the way a tide pulls back inch by inch. I picked up evening shifts at a bookstore, then weekend hours at a cafe. The money wasn't heroic, but it was mine, and that mattered more than the amount. I learned the price of quiet neighborhoods and how many stops you can stand before a commute starts to eat your patience. I kept a map in my head of potential rooms, stairwells that felt safe, windows that faced trees. It became a private hobby, imagining 4 walls no one else had a key to. At home, I tried to build a small island with my father and brother. We started cooking on Tuesdays because it landed between everything. Work, school, arguments that flared on weekends. Nothing elaborate, just a rotation of meals we could make without asking permission. We ate at the corner of the table farthest from her phone and called it our side as a joke that wasn't a joke. Dad seemed lighter when we did this. Like shifting the weight of a week onto a routine made him less likely to sink. My brother talked more, and when he did, I noticed he was careful about dates and names the same way I was. We were learning the same language of leaving things out. The key showed itself again on a damp afternoon in late autumn. I got home early from the cafe because the manager sent us off when the rain chased customers away. The apartment smelled like someone else's cologne. Not strong, just present, the way a sweater keeps a memory. I paused in the hallway, listening. The place was quiet, too quiet for anyone to be there, but the air didn't feel empty. I walked to my room and found my desk chair angled differently, a few centimeters off, the kind of detail only a person who lives in defense notices. I stood there, hands cold, and understood that even when I won a quiet day, the house kept a record of someone else's arrival. I moved the chair back, wiped the desk with a cloth, then sat on the bed and waited for my heartbeat to learn the room again. I tried new ways of speaking to my mother that year. Not pleading, not accusing, short, clear statements that didn't invite debate. I told her I wouldn't answer personal questions on speaker. I told her I didn't want gifts sent through her. I told her I wouldn't be at dinners where the phone sat between the plates like a guest of honor. She called me cold. I told her warmth and self-erasure aren't the same thing. She said I was punishing her. I said I was protecting myself. Sometimes we stood in the doorway, both of us holding onto our versions of love like suitcases we refused to put down. Neither of us moved. Then I would step aside and end the conversation because staying inside, it cost me hours I couldn't get back. There were moments that almost felt like peace. Once, late at night, she knocked on my door and asked if I had tea. Her face looked tired in a way that wasn't theatrical, the kind of tired that makes people honest without meaning to. We stood in the kitchen while the kettle clicked and didn't talk about anything dangerous. Weather, a neighbor's new dog, the price of fruit. The quiet felt good until her phone hummed on the counter and she reached for it without thinking. I watched the moment pass through her, the same way a reflex passes through a body, and remembered that our peace lived on the surface of water. One vibration and it broke. I learned to say goodnight to my father in small, useful ways. I fixed the hinge on the bathroom door. He pretended not to notice the way my hands shook with the screwdriver. He showed me where he kept the folder with bills, said it was in case he got home late, but I knew it was in case I ever had to do it without him. We didn't talk about the fight from months ago or the ones that still came in waves. He didn't ask me for counsel and I didn't make him my confessional. We were two people in the same weather, standing under the same overhang, holding the leak back with our shoulders. It wasn't pretty. It worked. My brother started asking about apartments like it was a game. If you move, can your place be near a bus line that isn't awful? I said yes, and showed him the map in my head. He asked if he could have my desk when I left. I said he could have anything that didn't fit in my bag. We didn't say the other part, that leaving would mean he'd be the last kid in the audience. I started taking him with me to the bookstore on quiet evenings and let him read at a table while I shelved paperbacks. When we walked home afterward, the streetlights made little islands of gold on the pavement, and for those blocks, it felt like we'd already made it out. One afternoon, I tried to tell my mother the truth without wrapping it in patience. I said I was tired of living in a house where a stranger's voice traveled farther than mine. I said I shouldn't have to feel watched in my own kitchen. I said I was leaving when I could, and that it wasn't a punishment, it was a cure. She looked at me like I just pushed a glass off the table. She said I didn't understand adult love. I said I understood enough to know it wasn't supposed to hollow out everyone else in the room. I didn't shout, neither did she. We ended where we always end. Her hurt on one side, my boundary on the other, the table between us holding up bowls and cups, and an old fruit stain that wouldn't come out. The money added up slowly. I put aside bills in an envelope, and on bad days, I counted them to prove the future existed. On good days, I didn't need to look. I went to see a room near the river with a window that stuck and a radiator that pinged like a metronome. The landlord talked too fast, and the hall smelled like dust, and I wanted it anyway because I could imagine sleeping without flinching. I didn't take it. The rent would have strangled the rest of my life, but I walked home lighter because a room like that exists, and one day one of them will be mine. Sometimes I wondered what the story would sound like if I told it to a stranger on a train. Would I say affair, or would I say noise? Would I say betrayal, or would I say becoming a person who double-checks doors? The words all point to the same place, a house where love is something you prove by letting yourself disappear. I'm not built for that. I don't think anyone is. On the night I realized I could leave and still love the people I left, I slept better than I had in months. It happened after a shift, after dishes, after my brother fell asleep with a book on his chest, after my father clicked the lamp off in the living room. I lay there and pictured the key in a stranger's pocket, and it didn't make my lungs seize. It made me angry in a clean way, the kind of anger you can put to work. I planned the next 3 steps, not forever, just steps. In the morning, I packed another small box, not to move yet, just to feel what it felt like. Old school notebooks, a photo of us before any of this, the blue mug I always reach for. I labeled it with my name and slid it under the bed next to the others. When my mother asked what I was doing, I told her I was making room. It was the truest thing I could say out loud. I don't know when the leaving will happen. I know it will. And I know when it does, I want the door to close softly, not slam, because I'm not trying to break the house. I'm trying to build one of my own. If she ever wants to visit it, she can. Without a phone lifted, without a second life riding on the call, without a key that belongs to someone else. If that never happens, I will still have a place where my chair stays where I leave it, and my name doesn't travel farther than I choose. That thought is a small lamp I keep lit in my chest. It's enough light to see the next step. For now, that's all I need. By the time I turned 20, the house felt less like home and more like a stage I was performing on until I could finally walk off. Every detail carried weight. The sound of keys in the lock didn't mean Dad anymore. It meant a 50-50 gamble on who was about to walk in. Even footsteps down the hallway set off alarms in my head, and I hated that my body reacted before my mind had the chance to calm it. The splinters showed up in small ways. I snapped at my brother for leaving the kitchen light on, then apologized too quickly. I folded laundry with a kind of aggression, like neat corners could hold together a life that kept splitting. I kept moving things, cups, pens, shoes, back to where I had left them, as if order could prove ownership. These were rituals, not solutions. They reminded me that some parts of me were still mine. My mother must have noticed. Sometimes she softened, sometimes she bristled. One evening she stood at my door with a bowl of fruit, pretending it was an excuse to check on me. She lingered, asking about school, about money, about plans. It should have been an ordinary conversation, but every answer felt like giving her ammunition for her next call. I gave her short replies, nothing that could be twisted into a story. She sighed, said I was shutting her out. I didn't correct her. I thought, you did that when you let someone else in. Dad and I developed a quiet rhythm. We didn't name it, but I think he knew it kept us both alive. He'd leave me small signals, an extra sandwich in the fridge, a note folded in his jacket pocket left on the chair, a nod across the table when my brother cracked a joke. None of these erased the fights he still had with her when he thought we were asleep, but they proved he hadn't vanished inside the mess. I held onto those proofs because they were rare and real. One evening I came home to find the stranger's jacket on the back of a chair. My stomach clenched so hard I had to sit down in the hallway. Nobody else was home, but the jacket hung there like a warning. I walked past it into my room and locked the door. For the next hour, I paced like a trapped animal, waiting for a sound, half ready to pack and leave right then. When my mother finally returned, she grabbed the jacket casually like it belonged, like nothing about it was invasive. I wanted to scream, but I swallowed it and stayed quiet. I realized then that silence had become my prison and my weapon at the same time. I started spending more nights at the cafe even when my shift was over, just wiping tables, counting the till, pretending to reorganize supplies. The manager probably thought I was dedicated. The truth was simpler. I preferred the smell of coffee grounds and burnt milk over the smell of someone else's cologne in my hallway. My brother was the only one I spoke to without armor. He'd knock on my door late, sit on the floor with his back against the bed, and talk about shows or exams. I could hear the hesitation under his words, the way he wanted to ask how long I planned to stay. I never gave him a timeline, but I promised, quietly, firmly, that I wouldn't leave him alone in it forever. His relief was so obvious it broke me. That promise became the chain that kept me inside the house longer than I wanted. The affair wasn't a secret anymore, not really. Relatives looked away too deliberately. Neighbors gave polite nods that carried too much knowledge. I learned how to smile back without letting anything through. Living in a conservative place means silence isn't just protection. It's the only way to survive the gossip machine. I hated that our pain had turned into a performance for others, something whispered about in kitchens that weren't ours. At night, I lay awake cataloging futures. In one version, I walked out with a suitcase, leaving behind the noise. In another, I stayed until my brother was old enough to come with me. In all of them, my mother stayed exactly as she was, split in two, dragging us with her. That was the hardest truth to accept. She wasn't waiting to change. She had already chosen her version of love, and we were just scenery. Still, mornings came. I made coffee, I went to work, I saved money, I breathed. Each day felt like pushing a boulder 1 inch closer to the top of a hill. I didn't know when it would roll over and free me, but I kept pushing anyway, because stopping wasn't an option. By the time I reached 21, the house had stopped feeling temporary. It felt like a test I had already passed, a room I'd outgrown but hadn't left yet. The tension was steady, like background static. You forget it's there until the power cuts out and you realize silence is possible. I wanted that silence more than anything. I had enough money saved for a room. Not perfect, not pretty, but mine. The decision circled me for weeks. If I go, what happens to my brother? If I stay, what happens to me? The fear of abandoning him sat like a weight on my chest. One evening, I told him I was close to leaving. His face tightened for a moment. Then he nodded and said, "Good. Someone has to." That broke something in me and freed something else. He didn't want me trapped out of loyalty. He wanted proof that escape was possible. My mother noticed the boxes under my bed and the way my things were always half-packed. She accused me of planning to embarrass her, of trying to punish her by running away. I told her calmly I wasn't running. I was walking toward a life where my days weren't shared with a man I hadn't chosen. She scoffed, said I was being dramatic. I didn't argue. I had stopped arguing months ago. Dad didn't say much when I finally told him. He just put his hand on my shoulder and held it there steady, like a post in shifting ground. "Take care of yourself," was all he said. I think he wanted to say more, but words don't always survive the air between people. His silence told me enough. He knew. He understood. He was too tired to fight the same battles anymore. The The last night in the house felt strange. I walked through each room, not saying goodbye, just memorizing the angles. The hum was still there. The ringtones, the half-hidden conversations, the smell of someone else in corners that didn't belong to them. But for the first time, I didn't feel trapped by it. I felt already halfway gone. When I closed my door that night, I didn't lock it out of fear. I locked it to mark the end. The next morning, I carried my boxes out one by one. My brother helped without a word, placing them carefully in the car of a friend who had offered me a ride. My mother stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, phone on the counter. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't wish me well. She just watched, like this was another one of her stories she'd repeat later. I didn't look back at her, not out of spite, but because I wanted the first picture of my new life to be free of her shadow. The room I moved into wasn't much. A single window, a radiator that rattled, walls that needed paint. But when I set my chair down and it stayed exactly where I left it, I nearly cried. No one else had a key. No one else could shift my things without permission. The silence that first night wasn't empty. It was full of everything I hadn't had for years. I still call my brother, still check on him, still carry the weight of knowing he lives in a house I left behind. But now, when he visits, he sits on my bed and looks around like he's breathing air from another world. I tell him, this can be yours too, and I mean it. As for my mother, she still calls, sometimes with sweetness, sometimes with accusation. I answer when I can bear it, and when I can't, I don't. I no longer let her voice dictate the rhythm of my day. Love and hate sit side by side in me, but they don't run my life anymore. I can't erase the years of secrets, the humiliation, the invasion of my privacy, but I can live in a space where my laughter doesn't get reported to someone else, where my milestones belong to me, where my silence is my choice, not my only defense. I used to think survival meant staying quiet and small. Now I know it means carrying both the wound and the will to move forward. I still love my mother, and I still can't stand her. Both can be true, but in this room, with this door, I finally get to decide which one matters more on any given day. And that decision at last belongs only to me.